So we're just starting Lent here, and this is a season of fasting. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about fasting and the way it's been used in our tradition, and maybe even give some practical tips and things. But I'm going to start with a Bible reading. This is one of the traditional texts for Ash Wednesday that I did not focus on Wednesday. From Matthew chapter 6, beginning in verse 16, Jesus said, "When you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces, that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you." So, of course, he's talking about same thing with giving, with tithing, with praying. He says, don't make a big show out of this in order for other people to see you, in order to kind of gratify your own spiritual pride or something like that. That's not what this is about. This is about getting closer to your Father in heaven. And that's what fasting and all of the spiritual disciplines are supposed to be about. But Jesus, note in that passage, he doesn't say to his followers, to us, his disciples, if you fast. He says when you fast. And he is working with the assumption, yes, my followers are going to fast. Now, I grew up going to a Catholic school and a Methodist church when I was a little kid. And then when I really got serious about my faith and kind of came of age as a Christian, I was going to a very fiercely evangelical Baptist church. And it was a great church to learn a lot about the Bible. That was really their strength, and I learned a lot about the Bible. And we did talk about fasting, but we didn't do Lent, we didn't do Ash Wednesday. And I got to college kind of with this idea, I didn't really say this out loud, but I had this kind of idea that fasting was like something Jesus did, back in Bible times. And I was really kind of surprised when I met people who were like, oh, I was praying and fasting about this decision the other day. And I was like, really? People fast? That's a thing? It is. And so I kind of got into learning more about fasting and other spiritual disciplines when I was in college. Now, in our tradition, for the whole church, the universal church, fasting has been something that for the early Christians, they did on a weekly basis. One of the earliest documents we have outside of the New Testament is a document called the Didache. It's probably written around the year 100 AD. Remember, Jesus is crucified around 30 AD. And it says, it's kind of an instruction manual for Christians, and it says, you need to fast on Wednesdays and Fridays, not like the hypocrites, meaning the Pharisees, who fast on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And some people think that might have been the market day, Tuesday and Thursday, so it would be a good time to have a lot of people see what you were doing. Fridays, of course, is a traditional fast day because that's the day that Jesus suffered. That's the day that Jesus was crucified. So this tradition goes all the way back to the very earliest church of fasting on a weekly basis. Now, for our tradition, the Methodist Church begins within the Church of England, begins within Anglicanism. And if you get a copy of the Book of Common Prayer of the Church of England, which is their sort of worship book and doctrine book and kind of their main little book, it says it has a number of fast days listed: Ash Wednesday, Good Friday, and every Friday of the year, and some other days as well. And John Wesley, when he was getting the early Methodists going, one of his goals was we're going to take the stuff in the prayer book that nobody really does, and we're actually going to do it. And so the early Methodists had this tradition of fasting on Fridays and also on Wednesdays for a lot of them. And so when John Wesley edited the prayer book to be the first worship book of the Methodists, he's got a note in here about days of fasting or abstinence, all Fridays of the year, unless it's Christmas Day. And so this tradition was certainly upheld by early Methodist preachers. Every Methodist preacher was expected to fast Wednesdays and Fridays in the early days, and they kind of softened it just Fridays by the end of the 1700s. And so this is definitely a part of our tradition in Methodism of fasting, not just during Lent, but really throughout the year. And using that as a means of grace, one of the spiritual practices that we use to try to open ourselves to God and to His grace. And like I said, I got to experimenting a little bit with fasting in college, and one of the things I quickly discovered is if you're struggling with any of the kind of temptations that have to do with your appetites, whether it's to eat too much or drink too much, or if it's about using pornography, or if it's about I don't want to get out of bed, or I don't want to just get up and do things that I know I need to do. Fasting is like this direct assault on that kind of fleshliness or that laziness. And I got to talking with a friend of mine who's now a Methodist pastor in Mississippi, and he said, your stomach is like a spoiled brat. And it is accustomed to getting fed 3 meals a day, and it will scream at you and scream at you if it doesn't get what it's used to. But if you get past that, it's actually going to be okay, and you really can survive. So he taught me a little bit about fasting as well. But that is true. For a lot of us, our appetites can run our lives, and fasting is a way of saying no to that in a very definite way. Of course, you can fast from other things besides food. I gave up watching YouTube videos on my phone for Lent because that was something I was doing way too much of. But fasting from food is this very sort of baseline fast. And I think a lot of us in our culture, a very kind of comfortable culture, and that's what we value. I think a lot of us feel like, oh, I couldn't do that, or I couldn't do that very much. And we ought to probably try that, especially if we feel that way. Couple of practical things. If you're looking, I know we have both of these books around here. If you want to borrow them, they're in the church library. The Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster has a great chapter on fasting, and it's very practical. He talks about how long to fast, how to break your fast, different things to expect from your body while you are fasting. And he also talks about kind of the spirituality of fasting. What is this about? How are we trying to empty ourselves in order to be open to being filled with God? And then another one is 8 Life-Enriching Practices of United Methodists. He has a short section on fasting as well. And he talks about how fasting, like tithing, is a way of deliberately doing without some things in order to invest in other things. And fasting is often, almost always, paired with prayer, right? When we are not eating a meal, that frees up time, and it's often devoted to prayer. And so those two go together. So when I was in college, I did some stuff that probably wasn't really smart, so I want to share a couple of practical things. If you get into fasting, maybe you can at least avoid some of the stuff I did. So the kind of most basic fast, historically, is just a 24-hour fast. And the way I would do it is I would eat dinner, go to bed, skip breakfast, skip lunch, and then eat dinner the next night. And for me, in college, it was easy to do that on Wednesdays because we had a Wednesday night communion service, so I could break my fast with Holy Communion every Wednesday when I did that. After that, it would have been a good idea for me to go eat a bowl of fruit or a salad or something. What I often did was go to the all-you-can-eat pizza buffet to break my fast. That's not really a good way to do it because you're jumping into gluttony, which you're trying to avoid, but also it makes you feel bad. It's not good for you. So breaking your fast with something light is a good idea. One of the things that John Wesley started doing as he got older is what he called the half fast, and he would basically skip breakfast and lunch, and then he would break his fast at tea time, which is 2 or 3 in the afternoon, with basically tea and a snack. And so this is a shorter fast, and he did that as he got older. I have done that a lot as I've just gotten busier and lazier. It's I'm going to do something. I will at least do a half fast because it's better than nothing. But that is a good way to kind of if you want to ease into it, you could start there and say, okay, I'll have a meal at 2 the next afternoon instead of waiting all the way till dinner time. Historically, another way that people have fasted, as you probably are all aware, is by continuing to eat, but just giving up certain foods, right? Giving up meats is a huge one. And for me, I know that in South Louisiana, a lot of people are like, yeah, we give up meat on Friday. We just have a big pile of fried shrimp or something. I don't know if that doesn't seem like fasting to me, but, if that's where you need to start. But a lot of people do have a very small breakfast, something like a salad for lunch, and then a very small meal at dinner, like a bowl of beans or something. And in the Eastern churches, this is still a very prominent way of fasting during Lent, where you're not giving up all food, but you're backing it down to very simple food and very small amounts of it. So those are some just basic thoughts on fasting. But as I've already hinted at, the point of all of this is not to do something to impress God or to make God love you more or to get credit on some divine scoreboard. Jesus paid it all, as we sing sometimes in church. Our salvation is accomplished in Christ. Amen. Fasting is not about, yes, that's right, it's not about changing God. It's about opening us up to be more aware of our own enslavement to our appetites sometimes, about our own need for God's grace, and about trying to be more open, more empty, like an empty cup, like that other hymn we sing, "Fill my cup, Lord," right? So that we can say, I'm putting aside other things, I'm putting aside other time to try to focus on God and be open to the Spirit. And certainly, in Scripture, you see that many people have encounters with God, have answers to prayer after they've spent time in fasting. And I think there's something to that helps us to be more attuned to what the Spirit is trying to do. So you think about Moses and Elijah. We mentioned them last Sunday on Transfiguration. Those are the people Jesus saw on the mountain when he was transfigured. Both Moses and Elijah encountered God on the mountain after fasting for 40 days.